Welcome to Season 5 of the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we talk with enterprise and technology platform leaders about the people, processes, and platforms that make marketing and customer experience successful, scalable, and sustainable. This is what creates an Agile brand. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom, advisor and consultant for Fortune 1000 marketing and CX leaders and teams as principal and chief strategist at GK5A, and best-selling author, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and Agile certified coach. The Agile Brand podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To sign up for the Agile Brand newsletter and get the latest insights and articles on marketing technology and CX, or to purchase a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, go to gregkihlstrom.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon and other retailers. And now on to the show. There are a lot of technologies, trends, and customer expectations in the world of e-commerce today. Today, we're going to talk about what brands need to do to stand out in an e-commerce world. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Laura Ritchey, EVP and COO of Radial. Laura, welcome to the show.
Hi, Greg. Thanks for having me. I look forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, me too. Looking forward to it. So why don't we start with you giving a little background on yourself as well as what you're currently doing at Radial.
Sounds great. I started my career in finance, and then I moved into the retail space where I've been primarily focused on supply chain. And now I work at Radial, who is a leading e-commerce provider, providing fulfillment, transportation, customer care, order management, as well as payment, tax, and fraud services to our clients. So really supporting the entire e-commerce journey. And I am lucky to get to be the COO over all of those operations.
Great. Well, yeah. So we're gonna touch on a lot of a few different aspects, at least of e-commerce. Let's start by talking about customer care and the customer experience. So customer experience throughout the buying journey is met with rising customer expectations and continually increased competitive pressure. So focusing on the customer, what are brands that do e-commerce well doing that others may not be?
I think it starts with setting the customer expectations and then delivering on those expectations. So if you say that you're going to deliver in 4 days, then deliver in 4 days. If you promise to have inventory in stock or the customer sees that inventory is in stock, then make sure that you have it available for them to purchase. So a lot of it is about this kind of relationship that you set with the customer when they're browsing on your website and placing that order about, what's going to come after they place that order.
Yeah. So omni-channel customer experience is getting more and more important as customers are channel switching and expect brands to keep up. I know I saw statistics recently that, like 15 years ago or so, a customer used on average maybe 2 channels, maybe 2 or 3 while they were shopping. Now they're using at least 5 or 6 out of many more potentials. So what kind of strains can that type of channel switching and that omni-channel and the need for omni-channel customer experience, what kind of strains can that often put on brands to deliver on? And, how can a platform like Radial help there?
Well, what we saw with the pandemic is an example of the strains that you see, right? So we went from being open for business to having the store channel close and all of the inventory in those stores become difficult to access and basically impossible to sell. And at the same time, you saw buying shift to the e-commerce channel who had been allocated enough inventory to basically support what was expected sales in those channels. So that's really probably the most dramatic thing that we've seen when it comes to switching, because if the inventory is not accessible to satisfy that customer order, you're ultimately not going to get that sale. So one of the things that we think about with our clients is what is the best way to have your inventory available. A platform like Radial can use several warehouses. They could be located on the different coasts or up in Canada, depending on what your needs are. And those warehouses can actually send the products that are needed to the store to be picked up from an online order, to the customer's home, to another warehouse to spread the inventory out. So really keeping that agility to move the products where they need to be to meet that customer demand and therefore that delivery expectation is the most important thing that you can do to manage through that variability and unknown about where the order is going to want to be picked up eventually.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's definitely been tough going lately for e-commerce companies. You mentioned, some of the supply and inventory issues. There's economic uncertainty, labor shifts, labor shortages. In addition to what you just touched on, how can technology solutions help e-commerce brands amidst some of these types of challenges?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's about, how we think about where we put the products. So, when I started in retail, you sort of used your last 3 years of information. And based on that, you pushed the inventory out to the store or, put it in the e-commerce warehouse where it was available to maybe be sold for wholesale or for e-commerce orders. Today, we have much better tools. Everyone's talking about generative AI and predictive modeling that enable us to more closely track the selling trends and allow product to be pulled to the location that would be nearest to the expected customer demand and to more quickly pivot than we did in the past. So I think that is helping a lot. There's also been continuing advances in visibility technology to the customer. So if you think about your own customer purchasing experience, you might get an email that your order was received. You might get an email that someone's working on it, that you might get an email that there's a delay that has happened for some unexpected reason. You know when it's left the warehouse, when it's making its way to your home. And so technology has also provided a level of visibility that customers really never had before, which, in turn really puts pressure on the brands to make sure that they meet those expectations.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And so to follow on to that, when it comes to the customer experience, you mentioned some of the communication and some of the advances that technology have allowed. What do you think that brands, maybe even some of the more savvy ones, are still not paying enough attention to when it comes to customer experience?
Yeah, I think this won't be a surprise when I say returns. So
Yeah.
when I think about all the advances that we've done from kind of what we call click to porch, when you place the order till it gets to your house, we do not see on return. So you might have a return experience now where you take the product back to USPS, for example. They may give you a receipt, but you may not know where it is until it gets back to the retailer, and you may not actually receive a credit for the cost of that product until the retailer is able to process it in their warehouse. So if you contrast that to what Amazon's been doing, right, they're providing access points where you can drop products off. As soon as it's verified that it's been received, you receive a credit for that merchandise and you can respend. So I do think that we will see some of those same things that we see in the front end of the order be adopted in the return space. I think something that's also interesting is I think you're also seeing retailers prompt people to take e-commerce returns to stores. So I recently made a purchase and I went to look on the packing slip because I was thinking about returning an item and it said, please take it to the store. We'll get a different size if you need it. We'll find an alternative product if you don't love it. And, it prompted me to go to the store locator. And the language about actually packaging it up and mailing it back was quite small. And so they were encouraging you to go to the store, which we know for a brand and retailer is the best way to get incremental buying is to get that person back into the store. So it's
Yeah.
interesting to see how thinking about returns is shifting.
Before we continue, let's take a quick break. If you're like many marketing leaders today, you're inundated with a need to improve the customer experience across an increasing number of channels and touch points, all while ensuring your team is performing well, innovating, and continuously improving. So how do you find the time to determine what's next for you, your team, your brand, and your customers? My company, GK5A, can help. Whether it is advisory services, evaluation of marketing technology platforms and solutions, or digital agencies and implementation partners, or assistance with creating strategic roadmaps and prioritization of efforts, we've done it all and served as an ally to Fortune 1000 brands in industries like financial services, healthcare, consumer electronics, professional services, and more. You can learn more about these services and contact us at www.gk5a. That's www.gk5a.com. Now let's get back to the show.
So let's keep talking a bit about technology. And, this wouldn't be a podcast in 2023 if we didn't talk about AI to some degree. So I'm not going to ask about ChatGPT at the moment, but, let's talk about autonomous technologies and, how they can benefit e-commerce. And what are some of the biggest opportunities that you see to leverage some autonomous technologies in e-commerce today?
Yes, I'll talk about robots in a minute because that's everyone's favorite thing to talk about. But something that's really interesting for us too is the same way that I talked about retailers can use predictive modeling and generative AI to think about their demand patterns. We can also use that in the warehouse to make sure that we understand the volumes that we're going to receive and we can match our labor. So it's a win-win for our employees because they know that they are going to have, work to do, and we can make sure we have the right number of people to enable that demand. And then obviously we're rolling out now various robotic technologies. Some of those, simply reduce the walk time, which is one of the big complaints that we hear from warehouse workers. If have a 1,000,000 square feet building or 750,000
Right.
square foot building, that's an awful lot of walking to do in a day, all the way up to, the towers of robots where you will get to stand stationary at your station and you're able to do much of your pick pack that you used to have to walk around the building to do. So it's pretty interesting to see how that continues to evolve. I do think that there is, some natural limits. So obviously people have talked about these fully automated warehouses and what will that mean for the future. For our business, we have customers that have a much higher holiday peak or a higher sale peak. So sometimes their sales can be 20 times what they would sell on a normal day. It's going to be difficult to design a robotic solution that's cost effective. So we find that marrying our skilled employees with a robotic solution is actually the most effective way to run the business.
Yeah, that's interesting. So where do you see autonomous technologies, predictive, all of this stuff in e-commerce heading maybe in the near future? What's coming down the road?
I think it's really removing repetitive tasks. So if we look at the robotics or autonomous technologies that are getting introduced in warehouses right now, it's to unload trucks, right? So not very glamorous to pull a bunch of cardboard boxes off of a truck or pallets off of a truck. It is to do pudding, which is what we call when we take a batch of orders and we separate them into individual orders. And it's a very monotonous turning and putting product into individual cubbies to break them into those orders. So that's where we kind of see is continuing to eliminate the repetitive tasks so that what we're leaving for our employees is really those tasks that require strategy, thinking, optimization, and improvement around performance. I think with the generative AI, I do think it's going to help us in training and onboarding. We have a very multilingual, diverse workforce. And so the ability now to present work instructions and provide training in many languages that even pick up the nuance of dialects is really exciting. And that's going to mean that we can get our employees to productive performance in partnership with them a lot quicker than we are today. So I'm really excited about that element.
Yeah, that's great. And to your first point, I mean, I think that's really in line with least what I think, the promise of AI and automation is really letting people do what people do best, and machines and AI do what they do best. So that's great. And it's augmentation. It's not replacement of humans, right? So it's certainly a replacement of some of their work, but it's the kind of work that's repetitive and not necessarily rewarding either. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So last topic I wanted to talk about is brand positioning and e-commerce. So while great products are critical to e-commerce, there's more to it than that. And, with many customers saying that the experience they have while buying a product or service is as or more important than the product itself, which is kind of sobering news to see. I saw that statistic the other day. And so, in this crowded marketplace with high customer expectations and increasing competitive pressure, what are some of the key components that a brand needs to have to position itself uniquely in the e-commerce space?
Well, one of the things that we saw during the pandemic was that many brands moved their e commerce customer experience to be closer to what you were experiencing in the store. So, for example, if you went to a store and you were buying a high end cosmetic, as an example, they, take it, they put it in the nice box, and then they wrap tissue around it, they put a sticker on it, and they put it in a bag. They pull up the strings and they walk around the counter and they hand it to you. Obviously, not entirely replicatable in the e commerce experience, but we have seen that that is now the ask. So instead of maybe that nice box going into a cardboard box and coming to your house with a label on it, we're seeing that that box gets wrapped in tissue and maybe is put in another box and comes to your house with the same sticker, so that when you open it and you see these, YouTube videos or things online on social media all the time of this unboxing experience, that you're having that same type of brand experience. Going so far as fragrance tissue paper, specific notes. So actually, some of our packers do handwritten notes saying, packed by Laura, with love, or whatever the sentiment is. So I think that really it's thinking about what is important about the customer experience to your customer, and then how do you replicate that wherever they shop. So even if they were to buy your product at a wholesaler, so another retailer, then how is that retailer ensuring that the you have a consistent experience, which really drives brand loyalty and lifetime customer value, right? Because I know what I'm going to get and I like it and I keep going back to have that same experience. So I think it's really understanding, what your brand positioning is. I think the thing to think about with that, though, is there is a large push around sustainability and how we think
Yeah.
about the climate and the long term. So we have to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is also respectful of our commitments that we've made around sustainability.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I remember, back in the day, opening an Apple product, whatever the case, laptop or whatever the case may be, it was always kind of an experience. And now, to what you're saying, I'm seeing that a lot more. So, creating that great experience, it's interesting how that can translate to an e-commerce space. But yeah, I mean, how are you seeing brands kind of take that balance between maybe extravagant packing and all that, and to what you just said, the sustainable aspect? Like, where do you see that headed?
So I think the technology continues to advance that is going to enable us to manage how we're doing that. So, as an example, you can now print a QR code on a box that can be unique to that customer
Mm,
and that contain information specific to those products. So, continuing with my cosmetics example, if you've bought, a face cream or a lipstick, it will be able to tell you what the ingredients are and how you can use them, relying less on having all of the information potentially in the product box itself, as
yeah.
well as anything about returns. So, for companies that are still using paper pack slips that are included. You could put that in the QR code. And then a lot of customers, clients used to have inserts, right? Where you would open it up and you would have a couple postcards that would give you either other offers or recommend similar products.
Yeah.
That will all be able to be accessed by QR codes in the future, removing all of that ancillary. So then you'll really be able to focus on that brand experience. And then as you flip up the lid or wherever that decides to be placed, you can just use your phone and get all that information that used to be stuff that, to be honest, many people scoop into the trash if it's not needed.
Right.
You'll actually
Right.
get more eyes on it, right? Because once I
Yeah.
scan on my phone, it's going to all pop up and I'll probably page through it rather than kind of how I used to maybe push some of that into the trash.
Well, and also as a brand, I mean, there's lots of benefits there to the brand because they actually know who is looking at it and when and all of that as well. Particularly when brands are having a hard time with third party data, and they need to collect more first party data from their customers anyway. So that's, yeah, I mean, I think that's a win, I guess, for customers, brands, and the environment. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and what'll be nice about that is that you'll be able then, like you said, to understand their preferences better. So I know
Yeah.
all of us get, many, many emails every day. It's become more of a noisy channel than productive. So to
Right.
your point, it's a great way, to continue to engage with that customer post purchase.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Beyond that shift to sustainability and things, any other trends that you're seeing with the brands you work with in the months and years ahead when it comes to branding, positioning?
I do think that people will continue to focus on the returns experience. So,
Yeah.
actually, one of the things that we've started to see in this again kind of goes back to thinking about the future and sustainability. Some brands are suggesting that you don't return an item, right? If at the end of the day, the cost of the return, both in transportation and in the physical handling of the product, doesn't really make sense, they're suggesting that you donate the product, right? Or that you gift
Mm.
it to someone else. And so I do think there will be a lot more to talk about in kind of the circular use of particularly like apparel and, packaging for beauty products. So I'm curious to see how the circular use of products and, the focus on like recycling of apparel right now is really big. So I do think brands need to think about like the life cycle of their product. So when the product is, used up or has reached its useful life, where does it go and what does it do and how does that become part of the brand experience? It benefits them because you might want to replace it or upgrade or whatever the item is, but it also is a good story around sustainability and continuing to protect the planet.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, Laura, thanks so much for joining the show. I've got one last question before we wrap up here. You've given a lot of great advice already, but what's maybe one piece of advice you'd have for brands that they can do today, or at least get a start on today, to take a step towards better positioning their brands in the e-commerce space?
Well, first, Greg, I just want to thank you for having me today. It was a great conversation. As you can tell, I'm passionate about these topics.
Yeah.
My advice actually is a question. I think you should ask your customers what they want. So we have a lot of brand partners, and what we see is we're still maybe trying to speculate about what the customer wants. So does the customer really expect 2 to 3 day delivery all the time for all of our products? Does the customer appreciate and enjoy the unboxing experience that we talked about earlier? If
Yeah.
I've made improvements in my return experience, are they welcome? Do they think it's easier? Say I took the pack slip out of the box. Does that resonate with them? I think that, I've been in retail a long time and we're really rich with data, right? We were able to do in person focus groups. You could spend hours and hours in stores. And I do see that the pandemic disrupted some of those ways that we used to interact with our customers. And certainly e commerce with them not being physically present, we interact in a different way. So I think it's really important that you gather those customer insights, that you spend the time to understand what your customer wants, what your future or desired customers want, and then focus your energy on that because there's so many things that we can be doing. We really want to make sure that we're focused on those top 2 or 3 items that are going to create that brand loyalty and increase the value of that customer relationship with the brand.
Yeah. Love that advice. That's great. Well, again, I'd like to thank Laura Ritchey, EVP and COO of Radial, for joining the show. You can learn more about Laura and Radial by following the links in the show notes.
Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkihlstrom.com. That's GREGKIHLSTROM.com. To get a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, visit my website, or you can find it on Amazon or other retailers. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.